Start Here 13, the Palestine Timeline Part 2, World War I and the first half of the interwar period. And remember, you can follow along with this one with this doc online. The year is 1914, and one of the candidates for the first modern war, certainly the biggest of the early ones, has thrown the entire world into chaos. At the time called the Great War, World War I involved many new, devastatingly lethal technologies, such as machine guns, heavy artillery, chemical weapons, tanks, and fighter planes, which left many communities utterly ill-equipped to defend themselves. The causes of one of the worst things that ever happened to humankind were myriad. Most people know that the catalyst was the assassination of Austria's Archduke Franz Ferdinand by Bosnian Serb nationalist Gavrilo Princip, which set off a chain reaction of various mutual defense agreements triggering one after the other. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, issues an ultimatum to Serbia, who mostly rejects it, prompting Austria-Hungary to declare war. Russia mobilizes in support of Serbia, prompting Germany to declare war on Russia, drawing France in against Germany and Austria-Hungary in an attempt to outflank France. Germany then invades Belgium, which brings Britain into the conflict, and before you can say powder keg, a regional dispute has become a global war. During the course of the war, as the already failing Ottoman Empire begins to crumble more dramatically, many promises are made, mostly by Britain, but to a lesser extent by France, to both Palestinians and Arabs as a whole. For example, British Jewish politician Herbert Samuel proposes a British protectorate over Palestine, while in 1915, correspondence between Sharif Hussein of Mecca and Sir Henry McMahon, who was a British High Commissioner, promises an independent state if the Arabs would join the British and rise up against the Turks. Hussein accepts. But on May 16, 1916, the Sykes-Picot Agreement is signed. You can think of this as kind of the Ottoman version of the scramble for Africa that we talked about previously. Essentially, it was a secret treaty negotiated between Britain and France and with the knowledge of the Russian Empire, arbitrarily carving up the Ottoman region with complete disregard for ethnic, religious, or cultural regions whatsoever. The Arab revolt, led largely by the Hashemites of the Hejaz, is successful. They expel almost the entirety of Ottoman military rule, and their rebellion reaches all the way up to Damascus. But on November 2nd, 1917, due in large part to lobbying by Chaim Weizmann, prominent Zionist, Lord Balfour issues his infamous declaration. Lord Balfour, despite what anybody tells you, was an extremely haughty aristocrat. He was openly racist, some would say white supremacist, and openly anti-Semitic. The infamous Balfour Declaration took the form of a very short, very vaguely worded letter to Lord Rothschild, a prominent leader of the British Jewish community and major financier of the Zionist movement. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours sincerely, Arthur James Balfour. You'll notice it never so much as says the word Arabs or Muslims, but it also stipulates that those non-Jewish communities could not have their rights infringed upon, which was basically already happening. The Sykes-Picot doesn't remain a secret very long. It's exposed by the Bolsheviks actually later that November. They had just finished the October Revolution in Russia, and the Bund were heavily involved. But Jerusalem falls in December to General Sir Edmund Allenby, and the following year in 1918, the entire Ottoman Empire falls, never to return, the fate of roughly 25 million of its former subjects falling into the hands of the corrupt and greedy few. It is 1919. The British effectively control Palestine, and Chaim Weizmann states to much applause that he has a dream of making Palestine as Jewish as England is English. Also, just as an aside, Nathan Birnbaum, who, if you remember, in 1885 coined the term Zionism, is by now an Orthodox Jewish man and an extreme anti-Zionist. You can pause to read if you'd like. In 1920, Britain officially receives the mandate over Palestine by the newly formed League of Nations, which only helps exacerbate Arab-Jewish tensions in Palestine, which had already reached a boiling point. In April of this year, the Nebi Musa riots erupt, which results in the deaths of 5 Jews and 4 Arabs as a result of this clash the Haganah is formed, which emerges essentially from the previous Jewish paramilitary group in Palestine that we mentioned in the last episode, the Hashomer. It was linked to Jewish labor unions, trained its members in the use of firearms in both kibbutzim and other settlements, and assisted in the smuggling of weapons into Palestine. Britain is by now arguing that Palestine and Jerusalem were always meant to be excluded from the promises made to Sharif Hussein during World War I. Chaim Weizmann, on the other hand, who had plenty of friends in the British government, is elected to be president of the World Zionist Organization, a position which he holds for several terms. This dichotomy essentially sets the tone of Arab distrust for British intentions for the next several decades, maybe forever. In May of 1921, more clashes break out. Arabs revolt in Jaffa, resulting in the deaths of 47 Jews, 48 Arabs, and hundreds more injured. Despite all of this, in 1922, the League of Nations officially incorporates the Balfour Declaration into the British mandate to build a Jewish homeland in Palestine. In quotes, because it meant building a state. One writer, noting the poor wording and vagueness of terms like non-Jewish communities, likens this formulation to calling the multitude the non-few. By now, thousands of impoverished Palestinians are displaced as Zionists buy up lands from absentee landlords in the wake of the fallen empire. Most sales are facilitated by Britain, do not involve consulting the Palestinians at all, and detailed land purchases show that even when they were, the Palestinians were generally misled about the purpose or details of such sales. This same year, the King Crane Commission completes, having been abandoned by almost all parties besides the United States. It shows overwhelming feelings of betrayal by colonial powers in Palestine, fierce opposition to Zionist aspirations, and a vehement belief in the growing Palestinian national identity. In 1923, Vladimir Jabotinsky, eventually Zaev, forms a youth group known as Betar in Latvia, which sows the seeds for the eventual official revisionist Zionist movement. In the following year, on June 30th, 1924, the Haganah perpetrates its first high-profile act of terrorism as it assassinates anti-Zionist Jewish Dutchman Israel Dahan. Dahan is murdered by Abraham Tehomi, born Zilberg, on the orders of Haganah leader Yitzhak Ben Zvi, born Shemshelevich, due to Dahan's general anti-Zionist political activities, but specifically because he had planned to travel to England to argue against the inclusion of the Balfour Declaration in the Palestine Mandate. This same year, as Jabotinsky officially forms the far-right revisionist Zionist movement, Brit Shalom, aka the Covenant of Peace, also forms. It lasted for almost 10 years and advocated for a binational Jewish and Arab state where both would exist in Palestine with equal rights. In March of this same year, the magazine Palestine features a 4-page editorial addressed to Lord Balfour, criticizing his declaration and beginning with the phrase "j'accuse," making reference to the infamous trial in France that had helped inspire Theodor Herzl, which is just another indication of how well informed the Palestinians were about the colonial intentions for their indigenous homeland and the motivations behind their resisting it. In 1927, Chaim Weizmann writes, "The Balfour Declaration of 1917 was built on air. Every day and every hour of these last 10 years, when opening the newspapers, I thought, whence will the next blow come? I trembled lest the British government would call me in and ask, tell us, what is this Zionist organization? Where are they, your Zionists? The Jews they knew were against us. We stood alone on a little island, a tiny group of Jews with a foreign past." I'm Paul Nabil, Syrian American, and this was Start Here 13, Part 2 of the Palestine timeline. Next up, we will start with the 1929 Western Wall riots in Jerusalem.